And thank you, Chair Powell, for attending this morning. If you can, a lot of times we look for historical references when we try to reference an event, a current event. A number of people, a number of pundits, when they look at inflation today, they reference it back historically to the late 70s and the early 1980s. From your perspective, is that the proper historical reference to what we're experiencing today as it relates to inflation?
That's the proper historical reference for what we're what we're trying not to replicate. So we look back. Obviously, all of us have looked carefully at the history of post-World War II inflation and business cycles and all that kind of thing. One of the things that's different now is that central banks, including the Fed, are very squarely take responsibility for inflation. That was actually not the case in the 1970s. There was a school of thought that really there were certain things that an independent agency just couldn't do because it was too hard and Congress should do it. So now I think central banks around the world have an inflation target. They have transparency so that they can be held to account for it. You know, we're not waiting. We are using our tools now and that's really different than it was in the 1970s. So also inflation expectations have been anchored for a long time. They really weren't then. They were allowed to become unanchored without much of a response. That would not happen in today's world and will not happen.
A few weeks ago when the CPI number came out, I was on my way to a breakfast meeting in Jackson, Tennessee, where I represented one of my constituents and I, when we were talking about the new CPI number, he said, I don't care what the number is because I know that I'm paying 50% more in gas than I did 12 and 18 months ago. I know I'm paying 20 to 25% more in grocery prices than I did a year ago. I know what the price of a new car and a used car is. If you were me, if you were a member of Congress, what would you tell your constituents about the rising cost, the expensive cost to just live today?
Inflation is too high. We understand that, and we're working on it. It's going to take some time, but we're going to get it back under control. By the way, we're seeing this everywhere in the world. We're seeing it more in the United States because our economy is stronger, but we're seeing it everywhere in the world.
Let me, if I can, follow up on a few questions that some of my colleagues asked about. Ranking Member McHenry asked you about the next meeting and your plans for the next Fed meeting, and I think you eloquently laid it out. But you also talked about the situation that's developed in Russia and Ukraine. My inference from your answer is that if Russia had not invaded Ukraine, that the Fed would be more aggressive as it relates to the balance sheet and to rate hikes. Is that a proper inference?
No, I think that remains to be seen. As I said, we are moving ahead at this meeting. It would be my expectation in 2 weeks with a rate increase. And we're going to make progress on agreeing on a plan at this meeting to shrink the balance sheet, and I'm confident we will. The question of when we implement that plan is not answered yet, so I don't think that's clear at this point. It's certainly something that we can't answer now.
Mr. Garcia referenced the President's State of the Union remarks last night. The President, when he talked about addressing inflation, said that we need to control cost. Did you hear him say that?
I did not. I was too busy getting ready for this hearing. I did not watch.
I won't tell the President.
I probably just did.
When the President said he wants to control cost, or that businesses should control cost to address inflation, would you have any idea what he's talking about?
I really can't comment.
Fair enough. In follow-up to my questions from Congresswoman Wagner, she asked you about cyber. I know pre-pandemic, pre-invasion, one thing that you talked about that kept you up at night was a cyber attack. If Russia were to retaliate against the United States in some form of a cyber attack, what degree of confidence do you have in our nation's banks to thwart a cyber attack from Russia?
What I can tell you is that everything that we can do to protect ourselves against cyber, we're doing it. We're doing it. The private, large financial institutions are doing it. They have been for some time. So it's very hard to say what's possible to happen, but we're certainly on high alert, and we will continue to be.